Say the line, Bart! Flame you, Hotman! Yeah!
Avatar: The Last Airbender is essentially the perfect TV series. If you've never seen it yourself, you've undoubtedly run into someone who's sung its praises to you. Aang's journey to master the four elements and defeat the Fire Lord has sparked a sizable fandom who have followed this world into comic book continuations and an eventual sequel series. After finishing The Legend of Korra for the third time all the way through, I was inspired to revisit the original adventure to understand what made the series itself work so well. And upon rewatching, one episode in particular stood out to me as the best in the series, this being Book 3, Episode 16, The Southern Raiders. In my opinion, it's the episode that perfectly encapsulates why Avatar works so well, and, on top of that, acts as the perfect revenge story. And that's a lot of praise to just give one episode, right? I'm not talking about the finale here, but I'm singing the praises of an episode that takes place late in the series, so what makes it so special? To understand this, we need to tackle the plot of the episode, since, well, it was a while for me, too. While sleeping at the Western Air Temple, Aang and his friends find themselves ambushed by Azula. During the scuffle, Zuko and Katara can't really seem to get along. Zuko just wants to help, but every time he tries to help Katara, he's met with anger and resentment towards him. Forced to flee, Zuko holds off Azula before being saved by Katara. Note that even here, Katara's angry with Zuko during this fight, but she still saves him as they flee. Having safely escaped, the gang finds themselves hiding out in a cave. Zuko receives praise from the rest of the group for his heroic act of facing Azula in front of everyone but Katara. She storms off after getting frustrated with him. Zuko and Katara have an exchange where it's established that the reason Katara doesn't trust him now is that she did before back in Ba Sing Se. To win her forgiveness, she says, he can either recapture Ba Sing Se or bring her mother back. Zuko consults Sokka, asking him to tell the story of the day him and Katara lost their mother, Kaya. Zuko links the anger and hatred he's receiving from Katara to this loss. Note that during this scene, he recalls that she mentioned her mother not only tonight, but back when they were working together in Ba Sing Se. It's a really interesting detail that shows Zuko's willing to listen and remember certain details about other people, a sign that he really does value this group of people and their individual histories. After acquiring some information about the fleet who invaded their village from Sokka, Zuko decides to help Katara find the man who killed their mother. Zuko and Katara ask Aang to borrow Appa. After Aang finds out why they want to, he strongly cautions against going forward with this. The issue here with Aang's argument isn't that he's incorrect, but rather that he's telling Katara to handle the situation as if they're the same person, and in doing so, uses the wrong wording. He tries to empathize by pointing out that when he lost Appa and when he lost the entirety of his people when they were wiped out by the Fire Nation, he felt very similarly. And while these are valid points, Aang fails to recognize that they have very different upbringings. Aang was born into a culture of monks, taught about peace, patience, and forgiveness essentially from birth. And not to downplay what he's been through, but in the grand scheme of things, all of this happened fairly recently, at least in terms of how long Aang has had to carry these situations in his heart. For Katara, this has been nearly a lifelong struggle. She's carried the memory of her mother every day for almost half her life. It's an event that has had a profound amount of influence on her system of beliefs. Aang urges Katara to forgive this man, but to her, he's done the unforgivable. After tracking down the Southern Raiders, Zuko and Katara come across their leader, who they believe is responsible for the death of Katara's mother. Katara, almost without any hesitation, begins to use bloodbending. This is a really significant moment in the narrative, as it's the first and only time Katara uses bloodbending without the outside influence of another person essentially forcing her to. This highlights a really significant element explored in this episode that I'll touch on in a bit. Eventually, Katara realizes that this man wasn't the one who killed her mother, and they set out in search of their former commander, a man named Yon-Ra. Zuko and Katara easily overpower Yon-Ra, and we learn that the reason Kaya was killed had to do with the Southern Raiders' purpose for their attack on the Southern Water Tribe. Their intention was to wipe out the last waterbender rumored to have been hiding out in the village. Kaya then lies to Yon-Ra, claiming that she's the waterbender in order to protect the life of her daughter Katara. Just when it seems Katara is about to put an end to Yon-Ra's life and exact revenge, she makes the decision to spare him. And that's the true theme at the core of this episode: choice. Earlier on in the episode, Katara says,
"Now that I know he's out there, now that I know we could find him, I feel like I have no choice."
This parallels Hama's line to Katara in The Puppet Master, where she says,
"The choice is not yours. The power exists. And it's your duty to use the gifts you've been given to win this war."
Hama's words seem to have stuck with Katara, and it's easy to infer that Hama's definitely on her mind when she uses bloodbending against the commander. So when she's faced with the opportunity to take out her pain and suffering on another human being, she hesitates. She's horrified at what she's let her anger do to her, and more importantly, she's reminded of how Hama sees her and what she said she's destined to become. But Katara doesn't want that for herself. She knows she's kind and empathetic. The important thing to note here is that she most likely blames herself for her mother's death. If she hadn't been a waterbender, the Southern Raiders wouldn't have raided their village, and her mother wouldn't have been killed. Whether it's explicitly stated or not, it's heavily implied that she carries the guilt of being responsible for what happened. The thing Aang failed to mention that would have helped Katara is that she needs to forgive herself first. And in this moment, she finally has. She doesn't need to forgive her mother's killer, and in the end, she doesn't. But realizing she's not to blame is just the first step in learning to forgive Zuko. She realizes that if she's not to blame, neither is Zuko. Just like it was Katara's choice to spare this man, it was her mother's choice to sacrifice herself if it meant her daughter could grow up. It's like Zuko says earlier in the episode.
Your mother was a brave woman.
Like I've said before, this episode is all about choice. Zuko chooses to go after Azula. Katara chooses to save him. Sokka chooses to give Zuko the information he's looking for. Zuko chooses to help Katara. Aang is deprived of the choice to let Katara and Zuko go on their journey. Katara chooses to bloodbend and, finally, chooses to spare Yanra and forgive Zuko. All of these character choices are informed by events we know these characters have already experienced. Zuko knows what it's like to live your life without a mother. He rightfully blames his father and disowns himself in order to enact revenge for her disappearance. To him, having your mother taken away is a problem and has a tangible, real answer in violence. But in the end, Zuko and Aang come to the conclusion that people process grief in different ways. As much as he wanted to help Katara, it was never his process to handle. Katara has to make these decisions on her own. As well as resolving and addressing problems of old, this adventure encourages our characters to ask a new question. If violence wasn't the answer in this situation, what is Aang going to do when he has to face the Fire Lord? This episode handles character interaction and development with a level of attention to detail that has never been paralleled in any other piece of media. That's why, to me, The Southern Raiders stays the most perfect episode in the most perfect series ever made.